Yes, so it's my pleasure now to make a start with the event, and I'm going to first of all just say a little bit about collaboration and partnerships in relation to urban restoration. And of course I have assumed that everybody understands that we're talking about urban ecological restoration. I'm not talking about retrofitting buildings or restoring buildings. And so I'll make a start now. As Sam mentioned, I'm part of a MB-funded research program called People, Cities and Nature, which has been going since 2016 and has funding through to the end of 2020. And of course we're hoping that towards the end of that funding tranche that we'll see what we can do about keeping things going even longer. So I just wanted to make a few comments, I guess, about the context of restoration, particularly here in the Waikato, and talk a little bit about collaboration and partnerships. So first of all, I wanted to introduce you to the drivers, if you like, the drivers of ecological decline and degradation in Aotearoa, New Zealand, because our program has attempted to focus directly on addressing the impacts of these key drivers. This is the threatened ecosystem classification produced by Manaki Whenua Land Care Research, and it shows very clearly the areas of the country where less than 10% of the original indigenous vegetation and habitat remains. You can see it quite clearly, and of course I've had the distinction in my career in working in the red zone all my life with the specific goal of trying to turn the red zone back into the green zone. So that's really what we're talking about today. So that sort of provides the context of habitat loss. Habitat loss and habitat fragmentation, which are the key drivers for decline of indigenous biodiversity in New Zealand. And then of course combined with that, you know that when patches of vegetation reduce in size, that we not only lose the obvious things like the trees, but we lose the full complement of biodiversity present at a site. And these curves, which were developed by Finnish ecologists many years ago, show this very clearly. The rapid and massive decline once you get below the 10% threshold. And so you'll always hear us talking about the 10% threshold, because we're interested in maintaining habitat on a landscape in excess of 10%, because if you don't do that, it is impossible to control local and regional extinction. You need at least that amount of habitat to maintain the full complement and assemblage of biodiversity on your landscape. And then of course the other major driver of decline and degradation in New Zealand ecosystem is pests. So I'm going to say no more about it because we have a specific talk on this later by John Innes. I also wanted to remind us all of the context, particularly of the Hamilton Ecological District, where we are one of the, if you like, the worst examples in the country of habitat loss and degradation. And these statistics sort of sum up the state of our nation, if you like. So in our city we have something of the order of 200 hectares of habitat where there is at least some form of dominance by native plants in the canopy, for example. That across the whole of the ecological district we only have 1.6% remaining of the original habitat. And although we do have some interesting little patches protected across the landscape, that figure there of 42 Queen Elizabeth II covenants, the problem is that they're all extremely small. The mean size of those patches across the Hamilton Ecological District is 4.4 hectares in size, with a total of 185 hectares. And then of course we have some scenic and allied reserves under the old Reserves Act 1977, about 385 hectares of those. But only when you get right off the edge of the low-lying terrain of the Hamilton Ecological District, up onto the surrounding ranges, for example, like the Hakaramata Range, shown in the image there on that right-hand corner, do you really get into areas which have significant amounts of indigenous dominated habitat? So that's sort of the ingredients that we're working with. We're starting on a very low base. We have a big problem, and we're trying to help solve both the creation of new habitat and the requirements of pest control to enable that habitat to flourish. This graph was produced in 2007 and some work we did in an earlier program also focused on urban biodiversity, but it shows the situation across the whole of New Zealand in relation to the peri-urban and urban zone. It's important to look at the curves there in the diagram and think about where we fit in this picture. If you've come here from a different city, think about which of these curves applies to your particular situation. The red curve along the bottom is the Hamilton style curve. So that shows the presence of indigenous dominated vegetation and the distance from the urban core. And you can see right at the 0 mark, if you like, where we're sitting today, there's hardly any. I mean, some of that is self-evident, but notice how the curve stays flat all the way out for about 15 to 20 kilometres. That, again, is the issue we're dealing with here in Hamilton and the Hamilton Ecological District. Other cities are better off, and so there are Wellington curves and Nelson curves. Wellington with its fantastic green belt up on the hills behind the city, and Nelson, where they also have significant amount of habitat close to or within the peri-urban zone in particular. And then the strange shaped curve there of New Plymouth, which is the city in New Zealand that has the largest proportion of indigenous habitat remaining in the built-up area. So it's over 8.8% of the built-up area still retains significant reserves of indigenous vegetation. Waitakere, when it was once a city on its own, was in the same sort of category, with all of that fantastic connection across to the west and the Waitakere Ranges. So this is also pointing out to us the significance, if you like, of how we need to, if we're going to restore in an urban setting, we need to be thinking about the context we're operating in, what's in the peri-urban zone, what's in the rural zone, how do we link it all, how do we reconnect it all together to bring back more of a functioning ecosystem which will enable survival of biodiversity in the longer term. For some years I've been saying urban restoration is the new frontier. I've been saying it now for so many years I think we can just take it as granted and get on with doing it. So our program that we're running, the MB funded program, is called People, Cities and Nature. It's called People, Cities and Nature for a real obvious reason. Nature in cities is all about people. It's about the socio-political context in which you have to work in order to bring it back, but it's above all, it's about the benefits that urban nature can bring to people. And that's been the driving force in the work that we've been trying to get established, not just in Hamilton, but across many of the main centres around Aotearoa, New Zealand. So the structure of our program is shown there. I'm hoping you can see it. We have various strands of work. We've tried to take a multidisciplinary approach to the research. So it's not just about ecologists like me who are focused on plants. It's about people who know about pests and animal fauna habitat. It's about social scientists who know about how we can work more closely with communities. It's about introducing elements of mātauranga into our work. So we have a separate strand of work there, Māori urban restoration cultural values, and you'll be hearing from Erana today talking about kaitiakitanga and its role in urban nature. So we've tried to bring together a team across New Zealand to focus on these issues. And you'll see at the bottom there, our program is based on partnerships. So our research partners include not only ourselves at the University of Waikato, but people from Manaki Whenua Landcare Research, people from Otago University, and people from Victoria University. We've tried to, I guess to be honest, tried to cherry pick who are the experts in New Zealand on the topic of urban restoration and bring them together into a single team to make progress more effectively. These charts show the extent of our relationships around the country. And you can see in that left-hand column, these are the main groups that have signed on to our program. Before we could get the funding, we had to demonstrate to the government that we had partnerships in place. So when we're talking about collaboration, we all want to collaborate. We're always up for collaboration, but actually to even get money in the research sector these days in New Zealand, it's more than a given. You have to have the relationships in place. And so we've been working with many of these cities for a very long period, even before we started the People, Cities and Nature program. You can see that there's an interesting listing of councils and also projects here, because what we've done in each of the major cities that we're working with is try to also link in with the major community-led project, which is trying to achieve restoration of urban biodiversity. So you can see, for example, Hamilton City listed at the top, and their obvious project that we're linked to there is Waiwhakariki Natural Heritage Park. For New Plymouth City, we have a New Plymouth District Council, and lower down on the list you can see there the Huatoki Conservation Group, which was one of the leading community groups restoring one of the big reserves in New Plymouth. So for every major area we have a connection not just with the government agency, the local government agency, but also with the particular flagship, if you like, the flagship community group that's doing actual work on the ground. Because that's the other thing about our research. We're not just interested in the theory, we're more interested in the practice and the application of the research to fixing things on the ground. So I better stop now, otherwise I'll take up too much time. You can also, we also have connections at the higher scale, if you like, the broader scale in New Zealand. And many of you, I'm hoping, are aware of the existence of the 11 National Science Challenges. These are the big research programs, the really seriously big research programs that are just about to get to the end of their first 5 years of funding. And the most relevant one here is New Zealand's Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, Ngā Koeora Tuku Iho, which some of us in the audience I see today were at the annual workshop for 2 days recently in Wellington, Monday, Tuesday. So we have made a very close relationship with the National Science Challenge as well. And in fact, in their recently released report on partnerships, partnering for success, there's a clip there in the image to the right of work on enhancing biological heritage in cities, which features the work of People, Cities and Nature. So we're very closely linked in with that national program as well. We also have international networks. Here are the two main ones that we're connected with. The Urban Biodiversity Network, which operates out of the eastern side of the US, and also the Eco Health Network, which is a very new network that's just getting started at the moment, which is focused on the interplay, the interaction between urban ecological restoration and human health. So this is becoming a major theme in restoration work around the world at the moment. The notion of the microbiome, healthy microbiology, healthy soils, healthy litter layers, healthy restored habitat, and the benefits that provides to human health. So we've been focused then on the opportunities presented by restoration in urban settings. Here's quite a long list of them. The point is that yes, there are difficulties in urban ecological restoration, but the opportunities, I believe, far outweigh the difficulties. And we're also, although we constantly talk about biodiversity, we are also interested in the other benefits that are provided by urban restoration, and there's a good long list of those here as well. So, you know, the carbon sequestration being undertaken at Waiwhakariki, every tree we plant that is going to be on the site permanently, is sequestering carbon, helping us with our work against climate change. And the health and recreational benefits also are listed on this list again, just a further reminder. Anybody who works in gully restoration in Hamilton City knows that that network of walkways, cycleways, and the running routes that I use pretty well every second day are so important for our recreational opportunities. So just my concluding slide is just that reminder of how all of this fits together. I love the ecosystem analogy for a whole range of settings, not just for natural ecosystems. In order to progress this sort of work, it is about partnerships and collaboration and operating under the umbrella of the concept of kaitiakitanga. And if you can get the alignment of the natural ecosystems, the communities of interest, the funding ecosystem, most important too, if we can operate in a collaborative and cooperative manner, that is when we get the best possible implementation. Thank you very much. Wiremu, I see you. See you again?
I think he meant to move his car. He was worried about his parking his car.
Right,
He'll be
that's
back.
right. We'll bring him back a little bit later. Okay, so we do have a little time for questions. So does anybody have a question, one or two questions before we move on to the next speaker? Anybody? There's one down there. Kevin, is it?
Yes, Bruce, so New Plymouth, was that a conscious action that they were able to preserve that green space, or was it a happy accident?
That was a conscious decision made by a group called the Taranaki Preservation Society. But having said that, the accidental part of the story is that when they set the blocks of native forest aside, they were in what was then the peri-urban zone. And as the city grew and expanded, it went around these really interesting, substantial patches of native forest. And because of the topography of New Plymouth City, with its gullies and hills and ridges, there was already a tendency for vegetation to remain in places that people hadn't got around to clearing it. So they had a major natural advantage as well that we don't have in Hamilton City because of our flat terrain. We've got the gullies to save us, but we don't have anything more than really flat terrain, really. And then, of course, what I also need to remind you of is that when New Plymouth City was designed in 1840 as a Wakefield settlement city, on the plan it also had a green belt, which was then negotiated away to dairy farming. So although they are in front at the moment, they could have even been further in front if they'd stuck to the city plan. Quite interesting point.